All right, good morning, everyone. We are so excited for all we have lined up today. I am Kristi Morgansen, co-director of the Space Policy and Research Center, also known as SPARC, here at the University of Washington. I'm also professor and chair of the William E. Boeing Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and director of the Washington NASA Space Grant Consortium. We are very happy that you have joined us here this morning. Before we move on to anything else, I do want to make sure that even though we are virtual, we acknowledge that the University of Washington stands on the lands of the Coast Salish peoples, whose ancestors have resided here since time immemorial. Many indigenous people thrive in this place, alive and strong. So today we'll be exploring a dynamic and growing sector of space technology and operation that is a, I think, not so well kept secret in the Puget Sound area, and that is satellites. We will explore some key aspects of satellite optimization with deep dives into data science and machine learning for modern aerospace engineering, and with looking at data pathways from satellites down to the scientist. As we move through the morning, I would encourage all of you to look around the Whova platform and take advantage of the connections we can make virtually. We have a virtual poster session platform with some of our satellite-related student research here at the University of Washington. So please enjoy the day, network with each other, ask questions. The Q&A is there in each session for you to submit, the questions that matter most to you. You can upvote the questions of others. If we don't get to questions during a session, the panelists may be able to stick around to address some of the questions afterward, writing in the Q&A. So after we shift to the next session, they can write in the Q&A. So chat with each other and connect. I'll be here throughout the day guiding us through the sessions, and we can't wait to get into each one. So now I would like to get us started with our grounding and satellite systems. We have invited Stan Shull here today to give us an overview of the satellite ecosystem with particular emphasis on our Pacific Northwest regions. So Stan Shull is a space industry analyst, consultant, and managing director at Alliance Velocity LLC, well known to many of us here, I'm sure. He advises space and software companies on market development, business strategy, and partnerships. Stan has worked on multiple satellite programs, classified military space initiatives, and NASA's space station program. At the Boeing Company, he directed corporate strategic planning and led an initiative to develop an aerospace data analytics business through joint ventures and acquisitions. As the executive in charge of partnerships at 4 software companies, he negotiated dozens of strategic alliances and helped drive successful exits by acquisition and IPO. Stan was an early proponent of space commercialization, and he actively promotes the space ecosystem in Washington state. He holds a BS in aerospace engineering from MIT and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Stan, welcome. Stan will be answering some of your questions, so please use the Q&A for the session in Whova, and he'll answer those live as much as possible. And if there's anything that rolls over after the end of the session, he can type the answers into the Q&A there. Off to you, Stan.
Thank you very much, Kristi. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I love the University of Washington SPARC events, and glad it's time for another one. So thank you. Kristi has and the team here have a pretty phenomenal lineup of speakers today, and I think there's a lot of expertise in the audience here as well. But what I want to do is give a quick overview of the satellite sector, sort of globally. I think this will be old hat to some of you, or if not many of you. And then talk a little bit about the space sector and the satellite sector here in the Pacific Northwest in the greater Seattle area. So let's go. So some of my friends who aren't super well versed in what's going on in the space industry think that the story about space today and satellites today is about a few billionaires who are spending as much of their money as they can to build large rockets and launch themselves and their buddies into space. I think this audience knows that that's really not the real story. The real story here in the satellite sector and the space economy is that we've got an array of industries, the government, the military, academia, and a lot of vertical industries that are developing and using applications to solve real problems and to create new opportunities based on space infrastructure and services. And the heart of this is, of course, the satellite sector itself. The space economy is variously said to be worth $300 or $400 billion a year globally. I think those numbers are slightly overstated, but however you slice it, the satellite sector is the lion's share of the space economy, and really for good reason. The global economy, and particularly here in the United States, our economy is very dependent on satellites. as is our national security. And to simplify just a little bit, you can think of satellites as performing, of course, many different functions, but sort of the three biggest pillars here of the satellite sector come in around communications, positioning, navigation, and timing, and then Earth observation or remote sensing. Communications, and by the way, each of these has a commercial and civil side as well as a military side. So for instance, on the communications side, maybe some of you have been a subscriber in the past to direct broadcast television to your home via satellite. Increasingly, we see satellite moving toward broadband internet connectivity. On the military side, communications are critical from space for strategic communications, everyone from the president in the time of a war or a nuclear crisis, even on down to troops on the ground communicating important battle management situation. On the navigation and timing side, of course, we have the GPS system, which we're all familiar with. The United States has ours. Russia, China, Europe have their own navigation and timing systems. Of course, the government's built these for military purposes initially, but we all use them every day free of charge, whether to get around, for air transport safely, for Uber. So businesses have been built on this capability. And then, of course, again, on the military side, this PNT, positioning, navigation, and timing, is absolutely critical for troops, for precision-guided munitions, and all kinds of things related to that. And then Earth observation and remote sensing, everything from climate change to weather to important data about Earth and human activity on the planet, and again on the military side for intelligence activity. We've seen in the Ukraine war how critical some of these capabilities are, including companies from the Seattle area, such as SpaceX Starlink, assisting the Ukrainians with communications capability, and companies like Black Sky on the remote sensing side, providing critical data to the Ukrainians as well. So again, the military side of this is pretty important. Overall, we rely so heavily on satellites. It would be, if we were to lose our satellite assets here in the United States, would certainly bring our economy to its knees, and we'd be almost defenseless from a military perspective. So despite its size, if it's big, but it's not huge maybe, but it's critically important. The other thing that's going on here in the satellite sector, I think most of you probably know, it's gotten very dynamic over the last few years. A lot of new entrants, a lot of new trends and technologies. And one of the big trends has been increasingly use of smaller satellites in low Earth orbit, and sometimes in constellations ranging from a handful of satellites to thousands of satellites. And that could be for communications, for low latency communications, or for more frequent and better resolution Earth observation capabilities. So just to talk a little bit about some of the main sector trends here. Each of these could be an entire presentation in and of itself. But on the communication side, there's been a slow decline in the direct-to-home television broadcast market from space, and it's been supplanted by a rise of broadband internet connectivity of the likes of SpaceX Starlink and Amazon Kuiper, both of which are headquartered here in the region. Internet of Things capability, and sort of the hot new growth sector here is a potential to bring high bandwidth from space direct to unmodified cell phone handsets in the future. Increasingly, these communication satellites are software defined. They're much more configurable. They're part of a hybrid mesh network in space with inter-satellite links. And these satellite communication networks are getting much more integrated with terrestrial networks using some common standards. So that's a big trend going forward. On the Earth observation or remote sensing side, with more satellites in space now, there's a real opportunity for more rapid change detection. So it's not just what was happening on Earth a month ago, but what happened yesterday, what's happened in the last few hours. Understanding that kind of change is important for so many use cases, certainly understanding human activity on the planet for all kinds of purposes. In addition, we're seeing a lot more different modalities. And what I mean by that is not just taking pictures of space, but using synthetic aperture radar to look through clouds or get imagery at night, or hoovering up radio frequency data, or doing GPS radio occultation measurements to get information about the weather and other things. And then all of this data is driving a real critical need for artificial intelligence and machine learning, bringing this into the cloud computing environment and turning all this data into actionable insights. And we'll hear more about that today. That's a challenge and a key opportunity in this sector. The most interesting thing in my mind from a business perspective about the remote sensing business is all the different vertical applications that it applies to: agriculture, insurance, finance, certainly climate change. We wouldn't know much about climate change without our space assets. Obviously, weather forecasting, communications, and Earth observation has been absolutely critical for groups like Doctors Without Borders, the Red Cross, in pinpointing where humanitarian assistance is needed. And of course, national security, which remains a huge portion of the space and satellite sector. Just a quick comment here on the Earth observation side. We're starting to see the democratization of Earth observation remote sensing data. When you can now get an app on your cell phone and order up a satellite image and have it taken at your time and place of choosing, which is what's happening now. And here's an example right here for that. So we're starting to see a real proliferation of this capability, and maybe just like we saw with GPS, we'll start to see a whole variety of new applications emerge that we haven't even thought of yet. So the last few years, the number of satellites in orbit has gone sky high, literally. Probably around 8,000 operational satellites in Earth orbit right now. This doubled between 2019 and 2021, and again between 2021 and 2023. Now, to be fair, counting all satellites just by units is a little bit suspect. The range in cost and mass from a very small satellite to a very large satellite can be a factor of 10,000, which is a factor of 10 more than the difference between a bicycle and a bus. But having said that, I think these numbers are still suggestive of what's going on here and how dynamic the satellite sector is. Just focusing in here a minute on the Seattle area and the greater Seattle area in Washington State. Roughly about half right now of all operational satellites in Earth orbit have been manufactured in Washington State. And on a current basis, the majority of satellites going up into space right now are manufactured in Washington State, which is pretty phenomenal. To be fair, the vast majority is due to SpaceX Starlink, which builds its satellites in Redmond, Washington. But Leo Stella, which builds satellites for Black Sky, is a contributor there. Companies like Starfish, Amazon, building a large constellation, and Explore will be joining the ranks of these companies very soon, as well as another company called Precursor, which plans a constellation coming up in the future as well. And looking forward, you can take a look at the satellites that are approved by the Federal Communications Commission. Now, this is not all global satellites, of course, but you can see that, at least as currently projected, Washington State has a huge share of the FCC-approved satellites at this time. So just stepping back a minute and talking just a little bit about the space and satellite economy here in Washington State. It's not just satellites, although satellites is sort of the centerpiece of it here. Blue Origin is the hometown heavyweight here. We're obviously working on spaceflight tourism, and orbital class rocket, a lunar lander, and private space stations. A phenomenal array of engineering activity here in Washington State. The large constellations, the SpaceX Starlink and Amazon Kuiper, between them have tens of thousands of satellites planned. They have, between the two, reserved or bought up the vast majority or significant majority of the medium to heavy lift launch capacity over the next several years. Our cloud computing giants that are headquartered here in the Seattle area, Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, they have a combined global market share of 60% in cloud computing. They have ground station services companies with antennas and teleports and ground stations. And they're obviously trying to get the data from the satellite networks into the cloud for analytics and machine learning. And they're also providing cloud capability to space companies to help them manage their space operations. We've got a huge array of space startups here: Stoke Space, Starfish Space, Explore, many others who have raised a lot of money, and the space economy here has been growing very fast, probably around 25% per year. This is a view I put together of the local space sector and the satellite economy here. I think the main takeaways from this slide are really the companies we have here in the area encompass the entire end-to-end satellite and space value chain, from manufacturing components and satellites, the rockets, software, operating satellites in space, providing in-space infrastructure to satellites in space, and then the downstream, getting the data down, doing the analytics, and turning the communications and Earth observation data into something of value for customers. We have a great array of supporting organizations as well, continuing to help the growth of the satellite sector here. By my estimate, I think that this above the dotted line here represents about a $5 billion space economy here in the Pacific Northwest or in Washington State, employing at least 12,000 people and probably more if you include some of the suppliers to these companies. Just to give a little bit of eye candy here this morning, on the upper left here, you see 21 SpaceX Starlink V2 mini satellites getting ready to be put inside the fairing of a Falcon 9 rocket. SpaceX so far has had around 30 launches this year. 15 of them have been for their own Starlink satellites. If you think of SpaceX as a rocket company, you might want to revisit that thought process. SpaceX is fast becoming a satellite telecommunications company that also happens to launch rockets. In the upper part of this screen here, you can see a graphic of the Explorer X-Craft satellite, which will be launching into space soon. Below that is a Black Sky satellite ready to be integrated into a Rocket Lab vehicle. That Black Sky satellite is built here in Seattle by Leo Stella and operated out of Seattle and produces pictures like the one you see at the bottom. In the upper right, you can see a spaceflight Sherpa vehicle. These orbital transfer vehicles take satellites to their final destination in orbit and also serve as a satellite to host payloads and other satellite platforms. In the lower right, you see a Starfish Space satellite servicing vehicle. 3 years ago, I met the co-founders of that company at the University of Washington, actually. And 3 years later, that satellite is ready to launch next month on a SpaceX rocket. Very exciting to see the entrepreneurship going and moving so quickly here. One of the key things I hope everyone understands about the satellite sector is it's nothing without the ground segment. And here in Washington State, we have a huge contribution to that as well. On the upper left, you can see the Brewster, Washington facility or teleport of US Electrodynamics. Other ground station companies here in the area include RBC Signals, Amazon Web Services ground station, Microsoft Azure Orbital ground station services, and of course, companies like Amazon Kuiper are working on very small user terminals. You can see there, David Limp showing that their user terminal for their Kuiper satellites is about the size of an Amazon Kindle. And the upper right, you see a depiction of this mesh network in space I talked about. So increasingly, satellites have inter-satellite links, including via lasers, such as the SpaceX Starlink and Amazon Kuiper satellites. And over time, not only will this help with the communication side, but the high bandwidth Earth observation applications like synthetic aperture radar or video from space can be transported with high bandwidth between satellites and get to the right ground station at the right time for low latency, real-time data delivery. Talking a little bit more here about Washington State on an economic front, there's been a lot of investment coming into the satellite and space sector here. Certainly SpaceX and Amazon have committed around $10 billion each to those so-called projects. Only companies like that could call a $10 billion multi-thousand satellite constellation a project, but billions of dollars of which have certainly come here into Washington State. Blue Origin has been investing a lot. Venture capital has put nearly $1 billion into space companies in the state or through IPOs. The cool thing that's happened here in the last 3-4 years is that this investment is now turning into real revenue. So we can see SpaceX is generating probably approaching $2 billion a year right now for Starlink. Blue Origin is getting contracts for New Glenn, for its NASA programs, its private space station efforts. Space startups are generating real revenue as well. Companies like Black Sky and Explore have garnered significant contracts from the National Reconnaissance Office, and NASA provides a lot of contract dollars to the state as well. So both commercial and government revenue is flowing into the space companies here. I'd say we're getting a return on investment is sort of the big theme here that's emerging recently. Of course, this leads to a requirement for people. And the space companies here in the greater Seattle area are definitely looking for people. Over the last, I think, 21, 22 months now in a row, there's been more than 1,000 listed open space jobs right here in the greater Seattle area. A lot for engineering talent, different kinds, but also for all different functions to support these growing space companies. It's also a little bit of a challenge for some of these companies to find the talent they need and get folks hired quickly as well. But it's a great opportunity for anyone who's interested in an exciting career in the space and satellite sector. When I look at this sector here, we've got from a satellite and space perspective, I think we have all of the elements to suggest that this will continue to grow moving forward. We've got a skilled workforce that encompasses computer science and IT and mechanical and aerospace engineering and all the other key functions. We have fantastic universities like University of Washington with the aerospace department, the computer science department. A fantastic place to live. I mean, just look outside today. None of us should be here on a video call today. And these great pillar companies that are helping to drive the ecosystem and the supply chain that supports them. And there's a whole bunch of us like the University of Washington Space Policy and Research Center and others that are doing a great job to promote the space ecosystem, to provide support for the people and entrepreneurs that are helping to grow the space ecosystem and ensure we have the right workforce for the future. So just to summarize, we have a pretty broad entrepreneurial satellite sector here. And I should just double click a minute on that entrepreneurial point. My friend Sean McClinton likes to say that we have this homegrown entrepreneurial ecosystem. And what that means is, unlike, say, Houston, which has the Johnson Space Center, or Los Angeles, which has a big Space Force base, we don't have that federal presence here. So this is kind of a uniquely entrepreneurial ecosystem, private capital, entrepreneurship, that kind of thing. It's been growing very rapidly, billions of dollars invested, now turning into revenue. We are by far the leading global satellite hub in the world today, and it looks to be growing even more going forward. And combined with that convergence with cloud computing here, I think that really speaks volumes about the capability this region has going forward. So just getting to a summary point here, I'd say space is definitely looking up here in Washington State. Kristi mentioned this earlier, maybe here locally now we all understand what phenomenal capability we have here from a satellite perspective in the area. I think we're still working on getting the rest of the country and the rest of the world to see that, but I think that's coming. Certainly when you think about what do you need here for a major growth in the satellite sector, you need that information technology strength, cloud computing, that software, that analytics and machine learning. You need advanced manufacturing, and you need a deep aerospace supply chain. Those things cannot be replicated. These are longstanding infrastructure capabilities that exist here, I think, pretty uniquely in Washington State. So for those reasons, I'm pretty confident that we are becoming a global leader in satellite and space. And that's what I had to say today. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Stan. That was fantastic. Can we get just a couple of questions from the audience, Amy? I think we have like 2 minutes, and then we're going to need to switch the system over to get the next session up and running.
I don't see any questions right now.
Okay. So I'll ask.
Yeah.
Stan,
Great.
what do you think is the key thing that we need to get to the next stage here in the area?
Oh, you're going to make me say one. I think we need to. I think we need to help. I think we need to help we need to market the area better. I think we need to work on the workforce side. We need to develop more talent in the state. We're importing talent today, which is fine, but we need to develop more talent in the state. I know that's near and dear to what you're doing every day, but I think that would be the other thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's move on to our next panel. So we'll be starting the next session, which will be on machine learning and data science for modern aerospace engineering, which is going to be moderated by Professor Nathan Kutz from here at UW. That'll be in about 5 minutes. So you can select that on the agenda in Whova. So just look over there on the side. And then, so we're going to log off this one, and then you switch over. It's a different link. Just be aware of that. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stan.